Hi all, I have another amazing game to show you between Stockfish 11 and Leela ID 62565. So this is provided by DCAP. The time control is 1 minute with a 1 second increment. The opening book here starts off with e4 c5, knight f3 e6, d4 c takes, knight takes d4, knight f6. So two horses are out, or two horsemen are out. Knight c3, knight c6. So four horsemen or four horses are out. And the author of this excellent course likes to consider that maybe instead of being called the four knights, it could be called the four horsemen. So that's why I mentioned that. So they're all out. And now here we're exploring today bishop e3. So that looks like quite a sensible, logical move. Black carries on here, pinning that knight. So the motto pin and win, or pin and gain a small advantage maybe at least. With black that would be an achievement. So bishop b4. We have white playing bishop d3 in this particular game. Now here it is actually interesting, the neural network approach to the position. Actually, in this position, usually in over the board chess, there are many example games, players over 2300 playing usually d5 here. This is usually the most common way to handle the position with black. For example, a relatively high level game, Mitkov 2455 against Eliscazes Cordoba, played in Ponferrada 1997, saw d5 here, and that game went knight takes and then e5. It's like black's got a kind of French defense style position. But nothing too much to fear here. It's a solid central pawn formation, a nice solid triangle here. Black getting that dangerous bishop and having the light square bishop without a counterpart, and not minding the queens coming off and the pawn started being pushed. It's a very comfortable position for black. And c4 break, which means now bishop a3, very dangerous. These bishops for black really vicious in this game. And here white resigned. It's a very difficult position not to lose material here. For example, rook takes e1 or bishop takes e3, maybe just simply bishop takes e3 in fact, and then rook takes e1 is the major threat here. It's difficult to see what white does here. It's pretty tied up. So white resigned there. So that's a great example of playing d5. This is really the most recommendable move, it seems, as far as human over the board chess is concerned. There have been a couple of examples in the main chess base live book with e5. This is much rarer, so we're talking about 99 games to 2 games, but this is the move Leela chose in this particular game, e5. Very interesting, I thought, rather than d5. So e5, we have knight takes c6. So Stockfish encourages black to get another pawn to the center. If we look at knight db5, a6 here, a3, the bishop might do best to go all the way back to make sure that the e7 square is not used, because white is relying on a tactic in this position with knight d5 to save this knight. So here, a takes b runs into bishop b6, with white having a big advantage, checkmating the queen. But black does best to play knight takes d5, which protects against that bishop b6 threat, and just take here. And this position is very nice for black. So that's not really a problem, knight db5, because of a6. So a6, and if a3, then the bishop going all the way back. Might be a slight improvement over bishop e7. Here actually, knight a4 with the same kind of checkmate the queen idea is evident. But even here, even if black does lose the queen for 3 pieces, actually that's quite significant, and black should have an advantage, it seems. So okay, so nothing too much to fear on knight db5 in a nutshell here, because of this a6 move. So we have knight takes c6 being played. On knight f3, you might ask, in fact, then maybe Leela's idea, you play d5 now, and this is really very good after queen takes d5, And here, just taking on c3 to push through e4 wins material, basically. This is a way of winning material without too much compensation from white. So that looks like a, harmless, really harmless, this knight f3, because it just welcomes this d5. It really does seem quite dangerous. Okay, so we have knight takes c6, and Leela plays b takes c6. So you can see black's getting a mass of pawns in the centre. The other perk here in the position from black perspective is this b file. So we've got two things to play on, the central pawn mass and the b file. Both sides castle, a3, the bishop drops back, it's preserved. Bishop c4, d6, we have queen d3. Bishop e6, not minding doubled pawns here. In the centre, it does control the d5 square if white took on e6. White just played rook ad1. As an example of dropping back the bishop, maybe just black just plays rook b8. So not minding bishop takes a7 because of the tactic rook b7, gaining a tempo, and this is going to be fine for black. Absolutely fine. So we have rook ad1, rook b8 anyway, hitting b2, b3. Queen c7 protecting the a7 pawn. Now bishop g5, rook bd8, and now Stockfish, in its wisdom on this very fast time control, gave up the dark square bishop. This might be a little bit controversial from a theoretical perspective, because this bishop could in theory run rampant on the dark squares in this position. These dark squares across this diagonal, for example, it looks as though maybe this bishop's got prospects at some point in various ways using these diagonals. Okay, so we have bishop takes e6, f takes, queen h3 looking at e6. Now queen c8 was played here. We have knight a4, the bishop goes to e7. b4, trying to discourage c5, but that's played anyway, actually, in this position, c5. And you might wonder, well, aren't the pawns rather a bit dicey here? White played queen b3. Isn't it a little bit dicey if white plays b takes c5? They do look a little bit diced, for sure, but this knight versus the bishop is the other issue here to consider. And white's pawns also are a little bit fragmented as well. So if we look at an example variation, the proof might be in the pudding here rather than the visuals. If black can get away with c4 just in time to stop a blockade and hit a3, this should guarantee at least an equal position. Here it's going to be black getting back the pawn, whatever happens, and it's an equal rook and pawn ending, for example. So yes, swings and roundabouts there, even though it looks a bit dicey. At this juncture, b takes c5, it wasn't actually used. We see queen b3. This does allow black to creep forward in the centre a bit. c4 gaining a tempo, h6, and that gives the king h7 now. That h6 move, a4. Okay, rook f7, king h1. The rook's doubled on f2, f3, which does weaken the dark squares a little bit, these pawns on light squares. Rook d8, rook b1. And now bishop g5. The bishop looks very comfortable to go onto this diagonal now. We have rook fd1, bishop e3. It seems as though white's getting positionally outplayed. If this was a human over the board game, you might just say that, well, black's just improving the position here. a6 giving the bishop a7 to play with if needed. Queen e1, bishop d4, a5, rook b7. We have knight e2, and the bishop uses that a7 square. So the holes actually by a6 and h6 are being used by black here. Very comfortable parking spots created by Leela, and this gradual pawn mass in the centre is being utilised here, it seems, as the major plan. We see knight g3, queen c6, supporting more firmly the prospect eventually of playing d5. But at the moment, white's kind of discouraging that. We have queen e2 and now rook e7, so d5 without dropping e5 is on the cards. These pawns are starting to creep forward, whilst this pawn is under lock and key at the moment. The bishop's on a beautiful diagonal. This this bishop's counterpart in the form of the knight. It doesn't seem this knight's that happy in this position. That pawn on e6 does a good job of keeping it out of the position. It doesn't seem to have great prospects. So black seems to have a much nicer position right now. And in fact, things are evolving for black here quite nicely after d5. So these pawns creeping forward, is it going to produce the fruit of a protected passed pawn in the centre? We see rook bc1. On e takes d5, this doesn't really do white too many favours, just this check here. Fischer says, Pat's a Caesar's check, Pat's a Caesar's check. Doesn't really do too much. The knight's been kept out of the position here, the bishop's still fantastic. So we see rook bc1, queen b5, and now e takes is played, e takes, so straightening up black's pawns, but I guess weakening f5 a little bit. We see rook f1, queen d7, protecting f5, rook c e1, rook c e1, rook e e8, rook d1, king h8. We see queen c2, queen f7, rook d e1, high level shuffling, bishop b8. Now knight f5. This is a really interesting positional transaction here. It seems with this knight f5, Stockfish is saying to black, you go and dare have a protected passed pawn. I dare you, because you know what? As soon as you play d4, you're weakening the e4 square. And if you weaken the e4 square, I'm going to plonk a knight on e4 and blockade e5 forever. And your bishop's going to be locked in by its own pawn forever. So that seems to be the deal on the table here for d4. So do you agree? Or is there something about this deal which you can have the upside without the downside of the deal? What would you play? Would you play d4? So this is for 500 positional points, virtual positional points. Please leave comments in the video. You might want to pause the video at this point and leave some comments and thoughts. Do you dare play d4? So this is the trade on offer. d4, there might be the prospect of knight g3 to e4. Can you bypass the downsides here? Would you play d4 here, in all honesty? Okay, very critical moment of the game. It's about having positional trump cards without giving the opponent any substantial trump cards in return. In fact, Leela did play d4. We have knight g3. The knight's going to that e4 square. The protected passed pawn is installed with tempo, hitting the queen. Now here's the critical moment. The knight e4 is a positional threat. Do we want to make another deal here? Based on the first deal, what would you play with black in this position? To stop this imprisoned bishop for the rest of eternity, what would you play in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, we've got a nice protected passed pawn, which might be good. Not just for queening a pawn, but also it's got hook squares. Like an I8 queen's pawn, they have hook squares, so e2 and c2 later might be useful as well. So if you don't do this, you're not going to get access to hook squares, especially e2. A positional pawn sacrifice, e4, opens up the bishop and has the potential that if you have a double rooks, you'll have the hook square to use, if nothing else, from this protected passed pawn. So e4, very, very interesting positional pawn sacrifice. If we look at the alternative, condemning the bishop for eternity, queen e6, knight e4, it's very, very difficult to see how black would be making any progress here. Very, very difficult. So e4 sets the cat among the pigeons, so to speak. Knight takes e4, rook e6. We have queen d2. So some of the ideas already, if we look at knight c5, for example, which maybe is tempting in some respects, then rook takes d2 here, queen f4, and all of a sudden we're threatening checkmate. Nice battery. That opening up that bishop is very, very useful for h2. Bang, and that would be a silly move, knight e4. And if g3 things crumble, queen takes, and then taking here, crumbling. So this would be extremely difficult to defend. You can't play queen g1 because of d1. Pawn crashing through. So this is an overload for white, this position. So knight c5, although tempting, doesn't seem to do white any favours. So we have queen d2, rook d e8. White's under real pressure here. This protected pass pawn is also a hook for e2. Anytime this knight moves, that e2 could be very, very useful. We have queen f2. As an example here, if knight g3, which protects e2, wipe out the knight first, this position, then there's rook e2. And this is super dangerous. After d2, queen e8, threatening rook e1, say king h2, rook e1, this position is just winning material. So that will be hopeless for white. So queen f2, bishop a7, hitting the queen, queen h4, queen f5, rook d1, we have queen d5, queen g4. So what has black got for the pawn here though? Isn't it stable enough for white? This is the other question about this particular position. Although the bishop is very nice, how does black actually evolve the position further? Rook f8, queen h4. In fact, queen h4 is a prompt for something interesting. A nice tempo gaining move, g5, queen h3. And now king g7. White at the moment seems to have a lock on the light squares, so as an extra pawn up, without too much concrete, it seems at the moment to fare. Rook d e1, rook e5, rook b1, sorry, queen g3, pardon me, rook f4, rook d1, queen f7, rook fe1, queen e7, rook b1, the bishop drops to b8, knight d2, we have rook e2. Yeah, this is getting really, really a dangerous scenario for white. So knight d2 looks as though why give up? It looks scary, this position. There's nasty pins, for example. If queen f2, you can imagine rook takes and then queen takes e4. Let's just put that on the board. Rook takes here. It seems in this position, queen takes e4, for example. And if the queen goes to h3, then it looks like g4 is very tempting. So knight d2 looks like a bit of a defeatist move, allowing an infiltration into e2. And Stockfish is relying on this very tactical move, queen f2 here, to hold the fort. If rook takes f2, this check, with check here, taking this position is great for black. Yeah, c3 is under fire. This is just horrible for white. So anyway, bishop a7 though was used instead. So rook takes f2 was also strong basically. We have rook takes e2, d takes, queen e1, queen e3, h3, and still the question is, well, what is black doing with this very dominating position? Now this is a very, very beautiful tactical positional move played here. I wonder if you can guess, if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, black to play here. What would you play with black? Okay, a real line opener, g4, trying to open up this h-file. This provides lots of nice mating net patterns. If you're going to open up the h-file, disrupt the h-pawn, it's a common mating net theme. We see white ignoring that with b5. If white takes on g4, guess what black plays here? Okay, tampering with the h-pawn, but you might also want a rook on the h-file. So h5, and if g takes, then there's queen takes d2, a crushing tactic for rook h4, a nice mating pattern emerging. So yeah, this h5 is very, very cruel. g5 again doesn't make any difference. Queen takes d2 and then rook h4 checkmating. So this is really, really crushing stuff. So b5 was played instead. G takes h3, chewing white's king safety. b6, the bishop drops back, and white's really under fire here. So that check is token check. Knight takes c4. If g takes h3, the tactical move to consider here is rook d4. So this is a real crusher. For example, here queen e6 hits h3, and even though the rook's hanging, it will be mating white here. So yeah, very, very nice stuff. So g takes h3. If queen takes d2, that would leave white winning after rook g1. So some care and attention needed. That will be hopeless for black. So, but anyway, knight takes c4 was played, not g takes h3, and we have queen takes c3. Now Queen F2, which just drops material. Yeah, it is hopeless, this position. So that looks absolutely hopeless, giving up that material. And now, yeah, just a piece up, and white resigned here. Yeah, shattered. White's king shattered, down in material, and just resigns. Both sides thought it was totally lost for white here. And it looks totally lost. So, yeah, what a fantastic game there in that Sicilian Defence variation. Leela chooses a move quite early in the opening, which has only been seen 2 compared to 99 high-level over-the-board games. There's a bit of a theoretically interesting novelty in this game, that early E5 rather than the natural-looking D5 at a critical juncture. So, a fascinating game from a theoretical perspective, and shows the ferocity of the Sicilian Defence 4 knights variation, where that nasty pin bishop b4 seems to give more than the options you'd think, more than just d5 in this line, you know, the e5. So this Sicilian kind of pin 4 knights looks like a lethal weapon. If you want to check it out, there's a course at Chessable to study the core lines, Sicilian Defence 4 knights or 4 horsemen course, Kingscrusher TV/Sicilian 4 knights. I hope you check that out. Okay. Thanks very much.